poured myself a glass of bourbon, sat down at the kitchen table, and read the text message from my son 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it the first time. I understood it perfectly. I just needed a moment to make sure I was the kind of man who would respond to it the right way. My name is Arthur Caldwell. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the state of Ohio. Raised one son mostly on my own after his mother passed. Paid off a 4-bedroom house in Columbus and built a retirement that most men my age would be grateful to have. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this so you understand exactly what kind of father I was and exactly what my son threw away on a Tuesday afternoon in November. The text said, "Dad, I think it's time we're both honest with each other. I have my own family now. My own kids, my own mortgage, my own life. I can't be expected to drop everything when you get older. That's what assisted living is for." I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's the truth and somebody needed to say it. I set the phone down on the table next to my bourbon. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because what happened next changed both of us, and I think it needed to happen. His name is my son, and he was 41 years old when he sent me that message. He has a wife, a woman I've always been polite to, though polite is about as far as it ever went, and 2 boys, my grandsons, who I love more than I can put into words. He works in sales for a software company. He makes good money. They live in a subdivision about 22 miles from me, in a house that I helped him buy 12 years ago. The down payment, $42,000. I didn't ask to be paid back. I didn't attach any strings. He was my son, and I wanted him to have a good start. That was the kind of father I was. My wife Carol died of ovarian cancer when our son was 9 years old. I want you to sit with that for a second. 9 years old. He needed a lot after that. Soccer camps, school clothes, a used Honda when he turned 16, college tuition at Ohio State, paid in full, all 4 years. When he got married, I wrote a check for $30,000 toward the wedding because his wife's family couldn't contribute much, and I didn't want her to feel the difference. When my oldest grandson was born with a minor heart defect that required surgery, I covered the out-of-pocket costs that insurance wouldn't touch. $11,400. I have the receipt somewhere. I don't keep a running tab on what I've given my son. That's not the kind of man I am. But I want you to understand the context of that text message. After Carol died, I made a promise to her. I told her standing in the hospital room, with the machines turned off and the nurses giving me space, that I would raise our boy right, that he would be a good man, that she didn't need to worry. I believed that promise for 32 years. That Tuesday in November, I wasn't so sure anymore. I finished my bourbon. I washed the glass. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and I lay there in the dark for a long time thinking about what I was going to do. I didn't respond to the text that night. I didn't respond the next day either. My son called on Thursday. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that said, "Dad, I hope you're not upset. I just think it's healthier to be realistic about expectations." He used the word healthier, like setting boundaries with your 67-year-old father who had never once asked him for a single thing was some kind of wellness practice. I called my attorney on Friday morning. His name is Philip, and I've known him for 24 years. He's the kind of man who doesn't waste words, which I respect. I told him I wanted to come in and review my will, my living trust, and the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts and life insurance policies. He asked me if everything was all right. I told him it was fine. I just wanted to make sure everything was in order. Philip had a copy of my documents ready when I sat down across from his desk the following Monday. He slid them across to me and folded his hands. "Arthur," he said, "before we go through these, I want to ask you one question. Are you doing this because you're angry or because it's the right thing to do?" I thought about that for a moment. "Both," I said, "but mostly the second one." He nodded and opened his notepad. My estate at that point was not bad. My estate at that point was not complicated, but it was substantial. The house in Columbus paid off, currently appraised at $380,000. A retirement account with a balance just over $460,000. A whole life insurance policy with a death benefit of $200,000. A savings account, some municipal bonds, and Carol's jewelry, which I had kept in a fireproof box in the bedroom closet for 32 years because I could never figure out what else to do with it. Everything had been set up to go to my son. All of it. Because that's what you do. That's what I thought a father did. I spent 2 hours in Philip's office that morning. When I left, I had a new set of instructions. The house would go into a charitable remainder trust, with the proceeds designated to the Children's Cardiac Care Unit at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, the same unit that had taken care of my grandson 4 years earlier. My retirement accounts would be split between two charities I had researched, one that provided college scholarships to first-generation students in Ohio, and one that funded meals for homebound seniors. The life insurance policy I updated to name my two grandsons directly as equal beneficiaries, not their father, not their mother. Then, in a custodial account they couldn't touch until they were 25. Kara's jewelry I would deal with separately. I had an idea about that. My son was not in any of the new documents. I'm not going to pretend that didn't cost me something. Sitting in the car in Philip's parking lot before I drove home, I had about 10 minutes that I'm not proud of. My hands were on the steering wheel and I just stayed there. I kept thinking about him at 9 years old, standing at his mother's funeral in a suit that was slightly too big for him, holding my hand so hard his knuckles went white. That boy. I kept thinking about that boy. But that boy had grown up into a man who sent his father a text message explaining that I should plan on being put in assisted living because he had his own life. I drove home. I did not call my son. I did not send him a message. I went about my week the way I always did. Morning coffee, a walk around the neighborhood, some projects in the garage, dinner at 6. My neighbor Hattie came over on Wednesday and we played cards the way we did most weeks, and I didn't say anything about any of it. I'm not a man who shares his troubles easily. Carol used to say that was my worst quality. She was probably right. 3 weeks passed. Then my son showed up at my door on a Saturday morning. I saw his car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. I poured a second cup of coffee and sat down at the table. I was not going to meet him at the door. I figured if he had something to say, he could come in and say it. He knocked and then opened the door because he still had a key. I hadn't asked for it back. He came through the hallway into the kitchen and stood there in his jacket, and I looked at him the way I used to look at survey reports before I signed off on them. Just taking it in. Hey, Dad. Morning, I said. Sit down if you want. There's coffee. He sat down. If you want. There's coffee. He sat down but didn't pour any. He put his hands flat on the table, the way people do when they're trying to look calm and aren't. He said, "You haven't returned my calls." "I've been busy," I said. "Dad, are you upset about the text?" I wrapped both hands around my mug. "No," I said. "I appreciated it actually. I thought it was good information to have." He blinked. He hadn't expected that. "I just meant I don't want you to have unrealistic expectations of us. I love you. We all love you. But my wife and I have talked about this, and we can't be responsible for— You're not responsible for anything," I said. "You never have been. I never asked you to be. I want to be clear about that." He looked at me for a second like he wasn't sure if I was agreeing with him or insulting him. "So we're good?" he said. "We're fine," I said. He left about 20 minutes later. He seemed relieved. He hugged me on the way out, which he hadn't done in a while. I stood at the door and watched him back out of the driveway, and I thought about whether I was doing the right thing by not telling him what I'd done. I decided I was. He'd made an independent declaration. I was honoring it. The letter from Philip's office arrived at my son's house 6 weeks later. I know the approximate date because my son called me that evening at 7:30, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, a kind of stunned disbelief that had not yet decided whether to become anger. "Dad, I got something in the mail today, from your attorney." "That's a notification of amendment," I said. "It's required by Ohio law when there's a material change to an estate plan. Philip's office sends it to anyone who is a previous named beneficiary." Silence. "You changed your will." "I updated my entire estate plan," I said. "Yes." "Dad, what? Why would you?" He stopped, started again. "I'm not in it." "No," I said. "Your sons are, the grandsons. A custodial account, accessible when they turn 25. The rest goes to charity." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had moved from stunned into something harder. "Because of a text message? You're doing this because of a text message?" "I'm doing this," I said, "because you told me you have your own life and I should make other arrangements. I took your advice." "That's not what I said. You said not to expect you to take care of me in my old age because you had your own family and your own life," I said. "I'm not quoting exactly, but that's the substance of it. I thought it was a reasonable thing to hear. It helped me think more clearly about my planning. He was quiet again. Then, Dad, I didn't mean for you to. I was just being honest about our limits. I know, I said. And I'm being honest about mine. Good night, son. I hung up. I don't sleep particularly well to begin with, and that night was not an exception. I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and had a long conversation with Carol in my head, the way I sometimes do when I'm working through something. I told her what he'd said and what I'd done, and I asked her what she thought. I've been having these conversations for 32 years. She never answers, obviously, but the thinking helps. What I kept coming back to was this. A man who tells his father not to expect anything has already made a decision. He just wanted credit for being honest about it. My job was to make sure the decision had weight, that it meant something, because I have learned in 67 years that the things we say lightly have a way of drifting out of us and into the world, and once they're out there, they don't come back the same. My son called again the next morning. And the morning after that, I answered when I was ready, which was the third day. He said he wanted to come over and talk. I said that was fine. He came on a Sunday afternoon. His wife did not come, which I thought was interesting. He sat in the living room on the couch where he used to do his homework as a kid, and he looked at his hands for a long time before he started talking. He said he was sorry. He said the text had come out wrong. He said his wife had been going through a stressful period at work, and they'd had some hard conversations about the future, and he'd been in a bad place when he wrote it. He said he didn't actually believe what he'd written. He said I was his father, and he loved me, and he would never just put me in a facility and walk away. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. When he finished, I said, I believe that you mean that right now. He looked up. But the version of you that sent that message, I said. That version was also telling the truth. And I don't know which one I'm going to get when I actually need something. Do you understand what I'm saying? He said he did. He looked like he'd aged a few years in the past 2 weeks, which I noticed but didn't comment on. I'm not trying to punish you, I said. I need you to believe that. The estate changes aren't about punishment. They're about being realistic, the way you said. You told me to be realistic, the way you said. You told me to be realistic, so I was. You could undo them, he said. Quietly. I could, I said. That's true. Will you? I told him I didn't know yet. That was the honest answer. He left that afternoon, and I stood on the porch and watched him pull out. And for a second, just a second, I saw the 9-year-old boy in the too big suit again. That image doesn't ever really leave me. I don't think it's supposed to. The weeks after that were different. My son called more often, not every day, but regularly. He asked about my health, about the neighborhood, about whether I needed anything. He brought the grandsons over one Saturday, and we raked leaves in the backyard the way I used to do with him when he was small. My oldest grandson is 8. He has Carol's eyes. My younger one is 6, and he talks constantly, and it is one of the greatest pleasures of my life to listen to him. My son walked alongside me in the yard that afternoon and didn't say much. Neither did I. There are things that get communicated in side-by-side silence that words aren't equipped to carry. At one point, when the boys were jumping in the pile we'd made, he leaned on his rake and said, Dad, I want you to know I've been thinking about what you said. Okay, I said, about not knowing which version of me you'd get. He paused. That scared me. I didn't realize I'd made you feel that way. I know, I said. I don't want to be that person. I kept raking. After a minute, I said, then don't be. We didn't talk about the estate plan again that day. A few months went by. One evening, Philip called to check in and asked if I wanted to revisit any of the amendments. I told him I was still thinking. He said there was no rush, which is one of the things I appreciate about Philip. I did a lot of thinking in those months. About what I actually wanted, about what Carol would have wanted, about the difference between a lesson and a punishment, and whether I was sure I knew which one I was delivering. I thought about the grandsons in that custodial account, and I decided that regardless of anything else, I was keeping that. 2 boys, my daughter-in-law's children, the ones who had no say in any of this, they would have something waiting for them when they were grown. That wasn't going to change. I thought about the cardiac care unit at Ohio State and the scholarship fund, and I found that I didn't want to undo those either. Not because I was still angry, but because they were good things. I had money, and they were good things to do with it. Carol would have agreed. What I did change, eventually, was the remainder. There was a portion of the estate that I restructured so that my son would receive something, not everything, Not what it would have been before, but something. Enough to matter. Enough to show that the door wasn't closed permanently. I didn't tell him right away. I let some more time pass. He took me to my annual physical in the spring, something he'd never done before. He sat in the waiting room for an hour and a half and didn't complain. On the way home, he asked if the doctor said anything concerning, and I told him everything was fine. Blood pressure slightly high but manageable, nothing to worry about. He nodded and kept his eyes on the road. He said, "Good, I'm glad." He meant it. I could tell. Carol's jewelry. I want to tell you about separately because I think it matters. I had kept that box for 32 years. Her engagement ring, a string of pearls her mother had given her, a gold bracelet, a few other pieces. I had thought about them many times over the years and never known what to do with them. They were hers, and giving them away always felt like it would be a kind of erasure. In the spring, I drove to my son's house on a Saturday afternoon. My daughter-in-law answered the door, which surprised her because I don't usually come without calling. I asked if I could come in. She said of course. We sat in their living room and my son came in from the yard and I put the box on the coffee table. I told them that Carol had loved them both in her way, even though she'd never met my daughter-in-law. That she had prayed for our son to find someone good and that I believe Carol would have approved. My daughter-in-law started crying before I even finished the sentence. My son looked at the box and then at me, and his jaw was tight the way it gets when he's trying not to show something. I told my daughter-in-law that the pearls were for her if she wanted them, that Carol's mother had brought them over from Germany and they deserved to be worn, not kept in a box. She said she was honored. She said it quietly, the way people say things they actually mean. I want to tell you I feel certain about everything that happened. I want to tell you that it all worked out cleanly, the way things do in stories. But that's not how any of this actually goes. My son and I are different with each other now. More careful in a way that I think is good. More honest in a way that cost us both something to get to. He's a better father than he might have been if none of this had happened. I can see it in the way he is with his boys. I don't take credit for that. He did the work himself. I'm 67 years old. I've had a good life. I built things and paid my taxes and raised a child alone and kept a promise to a woman who deserved better than to leave so early. I don't know how many years I have left, and I've made my peace with not knowing. What I do know is that when I poured that second cup of coffee on the Saturday my son came to the door, I was a man who had made a decision from a place of clarity rather than rage, and that matters to me more than I can explain. I didn't close the bank of dad because I wanted to punish anyone. I closed it because it was the only way to make my son understand what it actually meant to open it in the first place. He understands now, I'm sure of it, and somewhere I think Carol knows too. I've been turning this whole thing over in my mind for a long time now. Not obsessively. Just the way you turn a stone over in your hand when you're sitting on a porch with nothing pressing to do. You look at it from one side, then the other, and you try to understand what it actually is. Here's what I've come to. The choices my son made didn't happen in a vacuum. They grew out of something. Out of years of being provided for without being asked to earn it, without being shown what it cost. I don't say that to blame myself entirely. I made those choices out of love, and love is not a mistake. But I think I confused protecting my son with preparing him. Those are two different things, and I got them mixed up somewhere along the way. The text message he sent me, that was the fruit of something I had a hand in planting. That's not comfortable to admit, but it's true. What I did next, the attorney, the amended estate plan, the long silence, that wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that because I think people hear a story like this and they want it to be revenge. It's more satisfying that way. But what I actually felt sitting across from Philip's desk was closer to grief than anger. I was grieving the version of my son I thought I'd raised, and trying to figure out if that version still existed somewhere inside the man who had sent me that message. The thing about consequences is that they don't care how you feel. They don't care if your intentions were good, or if you were going through a hard time, or if your wife was stressed. Consequences are the most honest thing in the world. My son said something that revealed who he was capable of being under pressure, and the consequence of that was that I made decisions accordingly. It's not complicated. It just hurt. What I believe, after 67 years of paying attention, is that the character of a person gets built in the moments when it's inconvenient to have good character. My son had one of those moments and he failed it. What matters, What I think Carol would say matters is what he did after. He showed up. He kept showing up. He sat in a waiting room for an hour and a half and didn't complain. He stood in a yard with his boys and raked leaves and said the thing that was hard to say. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. I think the truest measure of a person isn't what they do when things are easy. It's what they do when they've been caught being less than they should be. My son had a choice. After that letter arrived from Philip's office, he could have gotten defensive, dug in, decided I was being unreasonable. Some people do that. He didn't. He got quiet and then he got honest and then he got better. I hope I was wise enough to make room for that. I hope I responded to his growth the right way, not by pretending nothing happened, but by not holding it against him forever either. That balance is the hardest thing I've ever tried to get right. I'm 67 years old, and here is the only thing I know for certain. The people who love us are going to fail us sometimes, and we are going to fail them. That's not a tragedy. The tragedy is when the failure becomes the final word. It didn't become the final word for us. I'm grateful for that every single day.